The Storm King Scourge is the best AR in Fortnite Save the World. It's one of the best mythic weapons in the game, and you can see it's one of the few weapons that I've actually supercharged because it's insanely strong. In fact, it's a major component of one of my favorite loadouts in the entire game. If you pair this weapon with Crackshot and you don't let it overheat and you never stop to build, you can just maintain a steady situation where you are doing over 960,000 damage per second. It is ludicrously strong, and it is an absolute favorite of mine for that reason. The reason I'm remaking this video is because my old video was 3 years ago and a couple of things have changed and I want to talk about it. So the Storm King Scourge had an early update like a long time ago where they actually increased its heat capacity. So in the early video, I recommended heat capacity or the cooling rate because you wanted to counteract that. But nowadays it's really not that big of a deal. You can use this weapon with normal damaging perks like I've got here and you'll actually be completely fine. With a little bit of management, you'll be good to go. And of course, befitting a mythic weapon that has perfect perk combinations, it's actually one of the only mythic weapons that does not have triple crit damage because this weapon would be already overpowered. I mean, it's already overpowered, but it would be even better with the triple crit damage setup, and I think it's perfectly fine that we don't have that because triple crit damage is totally rocking out. That's a fun way to play, but I digress. So these are the perks you want to use for these reasons. Now, like I said, heat capacity is not really necessary. Fire rate does add more damage on paper, but you'll just be shooting faster and you'll be stopping to overheat more often. So every second that you're not shooting is just damage that's not happening. So all the damage you get from fire rate is taken right back when you overheat. So crit rating double crit damage is just the way to go. When you're shooting even 7.5 times per second, which is slow for an AR, you're doing still, 1 to 2, maybe 3 crits per second, and that's plenty of damage. This weapon, if you're switching off between targets, taking advantage of that 6 perk up there, whew, that is a lot of crowd clearing capabilities, and you can affect a lot of enemies all at once, and this is definitely the way to go. The only thing that I might note is that if you're specifically using this for Mist Monsters, for some reason, you might want damage to Mist Monsters and bosses, but it's only 6% more than a regular damage perk, and typically with a Storm King Scourge, it's not like a high single target weapon like the Wrath or a Discharger or something like that. You're really doing all the enemies all at once. I mentioned that Crackshot build earlier. We'll talk about it later in this video when I get to the loadout, but it is, it's going to be just fine versus everything. I love this weapon so much. Now, before we move on to the loadout, I want to say that quad damage is an option. It's not going to be able to crit nearly as hard. It's not going to kill as fast. You're probably going to be disappointed. It's tempting to constantly do 120% more damage, but trust me, it's not as much as it sounds. It's actually a lot more damage to crit because you're not going to like magically one-shot every target with quad damage. Maybe the baby zombies, but you never needed help with them in the first place. You're still going to need to shoot them multiple times. You can see with a crit build, I'm doing about 400% damage here. Like that's actually 5 times as much damage with the way that the math works, and that is a lot. 5 times is 500% damage 38% of the time. That is significantly more than the quad damage version, so I don't recommend that, but I know a lot of you are going to ask, so I wanted to mention that early. So the only thing you want to consider is energy versus physical, and physical is a lot better against physical targets. You'll do 24% more damage, but you're not really using this in a Storm King fight. Trust me, I tried that and it was not easy. Link to that down below. I think energy is where this weapon needs to sit, and let's talk about how you actually want to use this weapon. So, like I said, this is not a weapon that needs to reload. Technically speaking, if you do overheat, that does count as a reload event. I wouldn't recommend using that for like locked and reloaded because that is only effective for 5 seconds, and if you overheat, you're going to be down for a while. That's not something that you can really take advantage of. Chaos Agent does not reset that heat capacity at all. You will not overheat any slower with that hero, so you really just want to shoot for as long as you can and then hold off. So, I'm going to move me out of the way just so we can check out this build. This is the way that I recommend to run the Scourge. Normally, I would recommend like a typical soldier loadout. Yes, I'm going to link a 4-year-old video down below. This is old beast a long time ago, but the general concepts still apply. You still want Sledge in the lead, totally rocking out, or Rescue Trooper Ramirez with Blast in the Past. Both of those builds will make this weapon fantastic, and even in the build I'm showing here, you can put Sledge in the lead, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, first and foremost is Crackshot. This is not a weapon that ever has to reload, as mentioned, and you can shoot up to 50 times, getting a whopping 145% damage bonus. That is ludicrous, but it gets better. You can have Bulletstorm Jonesy in support for an extra 25% that stacks in support. Now you're up to a 170% damage bonus, but it gets better. You can have Rescue Trooper Ramirez, which I just mentioned is a good lead, in support for an extra 17%. Now you're up to 187% damage in support, but it gets better. You have to activate Totally Rockin' Out. So you've got Battle Beat kicking in for an extra 50%. You've got Fumble, which is kind of the same bonus, but both of these are combined to get the team perk going. With an extra crit rating of 160, that's kind of 57% crit chance, but not really. I'll explain in a second, but that can get you up to about a 70% chance of crit when it's perfectly active. That is so much damage. And when you're critting that much, Tactical Assault Sledgehammer support makes it do so much more. If you're watching in a dark room, there's going to be a flashbang going on in a second here, but I wanted to explain the crit rating. With a normal crit rating perk of 30, you're adding 28%. That's why, with a base crit chance of 10%, you very often see weapons go up to a 38% chance to crit. That's where that's coming from. So realistically, when you combine Totally Rockin' Out, you get up to about almost a 60% chance to crit, which is still insane. That means the majority of your shots are doing a ton of damage, and that's where that double crit damage comes into play. Now, I mentioned that you can put Sledge in the lead. You can. It's technically a little bit less. This is going to get really nerdy really fast, so I'm just going to warn you right now, if you don't like math, then shy away. But I stripped out all of the damage bonuses, and I found the real base damage of the weapon, and I did some real nerd crap, and I found out that with Crackshot in the lead, it's 906,000 DPS, not 960. Sorry about that earlier in the video. But without Crackshot in the lead, you actually do 865,000. So you do slightly less with Sledge in the lead. However, with Crackshot, you're kind of stuck, okay? With Crackshot in the lead, you can't stop to build. You can't switch off your weapon. Well, those two things happen a lot. So you can't really play the game normally with Crackshot in the lead. So for a slight damage reduction, in fact, if we just take that 865, and divide that by our 906, you're doing less than 5% less. You might want Tactical Assault Sledgehammer in the lead because he will be more consistent. However, he's only buffing you when you crit, okay? These numbers here are assuming you are optimally critting exactly the amount of times that you should be critting, which is about 59.5%. That's not going to happen, all right? You're not always going to have Totally Rockin' Out active. It's never going to be a thing. Even if you're putting a ton of traps down, that's just expensive, and I think Crackshot is significantly more consistent while also having a higher upper end of your damage output. So it depends on how you want to play, but my point in all of this is that the Scourge is well paired with it. If you guys want more Crackshot videos, I'll link them all down below. This isn't exactly a Crackshot showcase, but I figure it's worth mentioning because it's a really fun loadout. This can be paired with a lot more weapons than just the Scourge, and if you're just finding out about this build, then welcome. This is just the beginning. So there you go. There are the best perks for the Storm King Scourge. It's funny because there's really only one way to run this weapon. A lot of times I like to recommend alternate versions, maybe a triple crit damage build, which is better with Totally Rockin' Out, but there's really no other way that makes sense to run this build. If you run like triple damage perks or even quad damage perks, that'll be a lot more consistent damage output, but it won't hit nearly as hard as a crit build. So if you want to feel good about using your energy cells, you can run quad damage, but I'm mentioning this at the very end because it's really not as optimal as it sounds. So it's just something to consider if you want to try it, but I'm sure you'll be disappointed. But that's just about it for the Storm King Scourge. Thank you guys so much for watching. I record all my videos on stream, so if you want to check me out, Twitch link down below, come hang out with me. I'll see you guys later, and yeah, thanks for watching. And then